He won every war, burned sacred forests into ash, chained rival alphas beneath his throne, and ruled a kingdom that obeyed him not out of love, but terror, believing the gods had abandoned the wolves, and that his victory proved he was untouchable. Until the moon began to draw closer, the night refused to move, wolves lost their power to shift, and the Alpha King who thought silence meant approval finally learned the truth too late. Every battlefield had been watched, every scream had been counted, every unjust punishment remembered, and when the moon goddess descended and spoke his name, Gomez realized that his reign was never proof of righteousness, but a test of restraint he had already failed, because power without compassion becomes a curse. No alpha reigns above the moon, and judgment, when it comes, does not need to kill you. It only needs to leave you alive long enough to remember what you've done. The Alpha King the world feared. He won every war, but lost his soul long before the moon goddess ever spoke his name. The battlefield stretched before him like a canvas painted in blood and ash. Bodies littered the scorched earth, wolves who had dared challenge his authority, warriors who thought numbers could overcome his strategic brilliance, alphas who believed their own legends could match his reality. They were all wrong. Alpha King Gomez stood at the center of the carnage, his black armor barely scratched despite hours of brutal combat. Not a single wound marked his flesh. Around him, his warriors moved with mechanical efficiency, securing the territory they'd just conquered, their 15th in as many years. 15 territories. 15 alphas who had knelt or died. 15 packs absorbed into an empire that stretched from the northern mountains to the southern seas. And Gomez felt nothing. No triumph. No satisfaction. Not even the basic pleasure of victory that should accompany such dominance. Just the hollow emptiness that had consumed him since the night he discovered the truth about gods and destinies, and all the pretty lies wolves told themselves to make sense of a senseless world. My king. Commander Darius approached, his armor still steaming with the heat of shifted forms. The enemy Alpha requests terms of surrender. There are no terms. Gomez's voice carried no emotion, just cold finality. His pack is absorbed. His warriors join our ranks or die. His bloodline ends with him. He is pups, my king. Young ones. Then they'll serve as omegas until they prove their worth or perish in the attempt. Gomez turned away from the battlefield, already dismissing the conquest from his mind. Have the scribes document the territory transfer. I want this formalized before nightfall. Darius hesitated, a fatal mistake with any other ruler. But Gomez allowed his first commander small freedoms. The man had earned them through decades of loyal service and the wisdom to know when silence served better than speech. What troubles you? Gomez asked without looking back. The men whisper, my king. They say the moon goddess watches our victories with displeasure. That we've strayed too far from the old ways, that conquest without honor will. Well, what? Gomez spun, his golden eyes blazing with something that might have been fury if he still possessed the capacity for genuine emotion. Bring divine punishment? Summon her wrath. He laughed, and the sound held no humor. The moon goddess abandoned us the moment she allowed the strong to prey on the weak, the moment she stood silent while innocent blood soaked her sacred grounds. If she exists at all, she's either powerless or indifferent. Either way, she's irrelevant. The words should have been blasphemy. Warriors within earshot should have recoiled in horror, should have challenged such heresy against the divine mother all wolves claimed to serve. Instead, they simply looked away and continued their duties. Because deep down, they all knew their king spoke a truth they were too afraid to acknowledge. In Gomez's empire, the only god that mattered was power, and the only law was his will. The fortress awaited his return, black stone walls climbing toward a sky that seemed perpetually gray over his lands. Some claimed the darkness followed him, that his very presence dimmed the sun and choked the light from the world. Gomez knew better. Darkness was simply the absence of illusion, and he'd stripped away every comforting lie the moment he claimed his throne. The throne his father had held before him. The throne stained with patricide. Though whether Gomez had truly killed the old king or simply allowed him to die remained a question his enemies debated and his allies knew better than to ask. He remembered that night with perfect clarity. His father, the great Alpha Remus, weakened by age and poor decisions, bleeding out from wounds sustained in a challenge he'd been too proud to decline. Gomez had stood in the doorway of the dying king's chambers, watching life fade from eyes that had once burned with the same golden fire. "Save me," his father had gasped, reaching with trembling hands. "Use your power. Call the healers. Please, my son." Gomez had watched in silence as the light dimmed. "You taught me that mercy is weakness," he'd said finally, his voice empty of filial affection. "That sentiment clouds judgment. That a true alpha does what is necessary, regardless of personal cost." His father's hand had dropped, understanding dawning too late. "So I'm doing what's necessary," Gomez continued. "Your weakness would have destroyed this pack within a decade. Your soft heart toward neighboring territories, your faith in ancient customs that serve no strategic purpose, your belief that the moon goddess would reward honor and nobility." He'd stepped closer, watching his father struggle for each breath. "You were wrong about everything. And I won't make your mistakes." The old king had died with Gomez's name on his lips, whether curse or plea, it no longer mattered. That was 15 years ago. 15 years of conquest and consolidation, of transforming a respectable pack into an empire that made neighboring territories tremble. 15 years of proving that his father's way, honor, tradition, faith, led only to weakness and eventual destruction. 15 years of winning every battle while losing every piece of himself that might have been capable of feeling the victory. "My king," the Northern Peaks request an audience. Elder Soren appeared from the shadows of the throne room, his ancient frame somehow still commanding despite centuries of life. "They wish to discuss terms of alliance. Tell them to kneel or prepare for war." Gomez settled into his throne, the massive seat carved from a single piece of obsidian, etched with the names of every alpha he'd defeated. "I don't negotiate with those who approach from positions of weakness. They offer trade routes, access to mountain passes, which I could take by force within a month. Perhaps." Soren moved closer, his clouded eyes somehow seeing more than most with perfect vision. "But at what cost, my king? Your warriors are tired. Your resources stretched. Your empire grows, but empires require more than conquest to sustain themselves." Gomez's fingers drummed against the throne's armrest, the only outward sign of his irritation. Soren was the only being alive who dared speak to him with such frankness, the only one whose wisdom Gomez grudgingly valued despite his rejection of tradition. "What would you have me do, old wolf? Accept their terms? Show weakness by negotiating rather than conquering? Allow them to believe they have leverage? I would have you remember that even the greatest empire falls if it expands beyond its ability to maintain control." Soren's voice carried the weight of centuries. "And I would remind you that strength without purpose is merely violence. Conquest without vision is just glorified murder. And faith without proof is delusion." Gomez rose from his throne, his massive frame casting shadows that seemed to swallow the torchlight. "I have purpose, Soren. I'm building an empire that doesn't rely on divine favor or ancient prophecies. One where power is earned, not granted by capricious gods who abandoned us long ago." "You speak of abandonment often, my king. As if the moon goddess personally wronged you." Gomez's jaw tightened, old wounds bleeding fresh despite years of trying to cauterize them. "She takes what she wants and gives nothing in return. She marks wolves for greatness or suffering according to whims we can't comprehend. She promises mates and destiny and purpose, then watches as those promises crumble to ash." His voice dropped to something dangerous. "I stopped believing in her the day I realized that faith was just another word for accepting powerlessness." Soren studied him with those ancient eyes, seeing layers Gomez thought he'd buried deep. "And what will you do, my king, if one day she proves you wrong? If destiny arrives on your doorstep despite your rejection of it? Then I'll conquer destiny the same way I've conquered everything else that stood in my path." Gomez turned toward the window overlooking his dark empire, his reflection in the glass showing a wolf who'd won the world and lost everything that made victory meaningful. Through strength, strategy, and the refusal to bow to anything I cannot control. The words hung in the air like a challenge to forces Gomez no longer believed were listening. But in the darkness beyond his fortress walls, the moon goddess smiled. Because destiny, unlike war, couldn't be won through force. It could only be accepted or destroyed. And Alpha King Gomez was about to discover which path his soul would choose. He ruled an empire built on fear, commanded armies that never questioned his orders, held power that made neighboring territories tremble at the mention of his name. But in the hollow silence of his fortress, surrounded by conquered lands and broken enemies, he remained what he'd always been. A king without faith, a conqueror without purpose, a wolf who'd forgotten that the strongest chains are the ones we forge ourselves. Victories written in blood. The Hall of Conquest stretched the length of the fortress's eastern wing, a monument to dominance that made visiting alphas pale before they ever reached the throne room. Obsidian pillars rose toward vaulted ceilings, each one inscribed with dates and coordinates of battles won. Between them hung banners captured from defeated territories, once proud symbols now reduced to trophies gathering dust in perpetual shadow. But it was the floor that truly told the story of Gomez's empire. A massive map had been inlaid in colored stone and precious metals, depicting every territory from the frozen northern wastes to the southern coastal plains. Black marble marked Gomez's original lands. Gold veins traced his expansion, year by year, conquest by conquest, until the map gleamed with acquisition like a disease spreading across healthy flesh. 15 territories. 15 campaigns. 15 legends written in blood and ash. Commander Darius walked the hall's length each morning, a ritual born from necessity rather than nostalgia. New warriors needed to understand what they served, what their king had built, what awaited those foolish enough to challenge the Devil Alpha's reign. Today, he walked with 3 fresh recruits, young wolves whose eyes still held traces of innocence that would be beaten out of them soon enough. The Northern Highlands, Darius began, stopping before the first banner, deep green emblazoned with a silver stag. Alpha Magnus ruled there for 30 years. Strong, honorable, beloved by his people. He believed the old ways would protect him, that the moon goddess favored those who fought with honor. What happened to him? The youngest recruit asked. Alpha King Gomez happened. Darius's voice held no emotion. Facts, not judgment. That was survival in this empire. Magnus challenged our king to single combat, believing divine favor would ensure his victory. The battle lasted 7 minutes. Gomez broke every bone in Magnus' body without killing him, then made him watch as his territory was absorbed, his warriors given a choice, kneel or die. And Magnus serves in the slave pits beneath the fortress, hauling stone and iron for the walls he once thought impregnable. The king believes death is mercy. He prefers his enemies alive, witnessing daily the complete destruction of everything they built. The recruits exchanged uneasy glances. Darius moved to the next banner, crimson with a golden wolf's head. The Crimson Pack. They controlled the eastern trade routes, grew wealthy on tariffs and merchant protection. Alpha Constantine thought gold could buy him safety, that economic leverage would deter conquest. Darius's lips curved without humor. He was wrong. The Eastern campaign had been brutal even by Gomez's standards. Constantine had hired mercenaries, foreign warriors with no loyalty to wolf law or tradition. The fighting had lasted 3 months, bloody and merciless. Gomez had won by doing what Constantine thought unthinkable, burning the sacred redwood grove. The ancient forest had stood for millennia, protected by customs older than memory, believed to be blessed by the moon goddess herself. Wolves from all territories made pilgrimages there, seeking guidance, performing bonding ceremonies beneath trees that had witnessed centuries of wolf history. Gomez had ordered it raised. My king, Darius had protested then, one of the few times he'd questioned orders. The redwood grove is holy ground. To destroy it would be strategic. Gomez had interrupted coldly. Constantine hides his reserves there, believing tradition protects him. He's wrong. Burn it. Every tree, every shrine, every symbol of divine protection that has proven utterly useless in preventing this war. The flames had been visible for 3 days. Smoke blackened the sky, and wolves across territories howled in mourning as centuries of history turned to ash. Constantine had emerged from the grove's ruins, broken by the realization that nothing was sacred, nothing protected, nothing beyond Gomez's willingness to destroy. He knelt in the ashes and surrendered. Now he worked in Gomez's forges, his merchant's hands scarred from handling molten metal, creating weapons for the empire that had obliterated everything he valued. "The king shows no mercy," the female recruit asked quietly. "The king shows perfect mercy," Darius corrected. "He lets them live. He gives them purpose in service to something greater than their failed territories. He proves daily that their old ways, their traditions, their faith in divine protection, all of it was weakness dressed as virtue." They moved deeper into the hall, past banner after banner, each representing a campaign, a conquest, a former alpha brought low. The Western Shore Pacts had united against Gomez, 7 territories forming an unprecedented alliance. They'd believed numbers would prevail, that coordinated strategy could overcome his tactical genius. They learned otherwise at the Battle of Broken Cliffs. Gomez had let them gather their forces, had appeared to retreat, drawing them deeper into terrain he'd spent months preparing. When the trap closed, 3,000 warriors found themselves caught between cliffs rigged to collapse and the sea at their backs. The alliance had lasted 6 hours. The survivors still spoke in whispers of how Gomez had given them a choice: drown in the sea or kneel on the beach. Most had knelt. Those who chose the water became lessons about the cost of pride. The 7 alphas who'd led the alliance now served as Gomez's advisors on coastal territories, forced to use their knowledge to strengthen the empire that had destroyed their own. "He doesn't just conquer," the youngest recruit realized, horror and awe mixing in his voice. "He transforms enemies into tools." "Exactly." Darius stopped before the newest banner, midnight blue with white mountains. The northern peaks fell 3 months ago. Alpha Theron believed his mountain fortresses were impregnable, that winter would protect him, that Gomez couldn't sustain a siege in hostile terrain. The northern campaign had been Gomez's masterpiece of cruelty. Rather than siege the fortresses, he'd simply waited. Posted warriors at every pass, every route down from the mountains. Then he'd burned the valleys below, destroying every farm, every food source, every supply line. The mountain packs had starved. Not quickly. Not mercifully. Slowly, over months, as they watched their pups grow thin and their elders weaken. Theron had sent messenger after messenger, begging for terms, offering unconditional surrender. Gomez had ignored them all. Only when wolves began dying did he respond with a single message: "Eat your pride or eat your dead. Choose." Theron had descended from his fortress, walking past the corpses of those who'd starved, and knelt in the ashes of his burned territories. He hadn't spoken a word, hadn't begged or negotiated. He'd simply bent his neck in absolute submission. Now his warriors formed Gomez's mountain infantry, and Theron himself commanded them, using his knowledge of alpine warfare to make the empire's northern borders impenetrable. "Every victory proves the king's philosophy," Darius concluded, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd witnessed every battle, every conquest, every calculated cruelty. "That strength without mercy builds empires. That honor without power is suicide. That faith in divine protection is delusion that gets wolves killed." The recruits stared at the map beneath their feet, gold veins spreading like infection across stone territories. "And the king has never lost?" the female asked. "Never." Darius's certainty was absolute. Not a battle, not a siege, not a single campaign in 15 years of conquest. He is undefeated because he understands what softer alphas refuse to accept. War is not about honor or righteousness. It's about winning. And winners write history. He didn't tell them about the nights he'd seen Gomez standing alone in this hall, staring at his conquests with eyes that held no triumph. Didn't mention the emptiness that seemed to consume their king despite victory after victory after victory. Didn't speak of his private fear that Gomez wasn't building an empire, he was building a monument to the death of his own soul, one conquest at a time. Above the fortress, beyond the smoke and shadow that perpetually shrouded Gomez's lands, the moon watched in silence. The moon goddess saw every battlefield, every burned forest, every broken alpha forced to serve the empire that destroyed them. She saw the darkness consuming her son, watched him mistake cruelty for strength, confuse domination with purpose. She saw him winning everything that mattered to wolves while losing everything that made him one. And she waited. Because destiny had never been about conquest or control. It had always been about the one thing Alpha King Gomez had systematically destroyed in himself and everyone around him. The capacity to recognize that some battles couldn't be won through force. Some victories required surrender. And some wolves needed to lose everything before they could find what they'd been searching for all along. His empire sprawled across the map like a golden disease, each vein representing broken territories and shattered pride. 15 victories. 15 conquered lands. 15 alphas who'd learned that honor was just another word for weakness in a world ruled by the devil alpha. But in his relentless pursuit of dominance, Gomez had forgotten the oldest truth known to wolves. The moon goddess doesn't punish through defeat, she teaches through emptiness that no amount of conquest can fill. The screams beneath the throne. By daylight, the palace of Alpha King Gomez stood proud, black stone rising above the city like an unbreakable promise of strength. Banners fluttered. Guards stood still as statues. To outsiders, it looked like order. Like safety. Like the reward of a strong ruler. But beneath the throne, the truth lived and breathed and screamed. Gomez believed fear was the purest form of loyalty. Love could fade. Respect could waver. But fear, he knew, sank into bone and stayed there. That was why punishment under his rule was never private. In the central square, where festivals once bloomed and pups once chased one another, iron posts had been driven into the ground. Chains hung from them, stained dark by time and use. When someone disobeyed, questioned a command, hesitated in war, spoke sympathy for the defeated. They were brought there at dawn. The Alpha King watched from his balcony. No trial. No defense. Just judgment. The people were forced to gather. Omegas, warriors, elders, none were allowed to look away. Gomez wanted the lesson carved into their memories. This is what happens when you forget who rules you. Cries echoed across the stone. Sometimes it was a scream of pain. Sometimes it was silence, far worse than screaming, when the punishment went on too long. Gomez never flinched. He called it discipline. He called it necessary. And the crowd learned to lower their eyes. But the square was only the surface of his cruelty. Beneath the palace lay a world the sun never touched. A labyrinth of stone corridors stretched under the throne room, carved generations ago for storage and escape. Gomez had turned them into cages. Iron bars lined the walls. Heavy locks sealed fates. This was where captives disappeared. Warriors from defeated packs were kept alive. Not out of mercy, but utility. They were paraded during victories, bruised and broken, proof of Gomez's dominance. Some were forced to kneel before him during court, their chains clinking softly as he spoke of honor and strength. Omegas suffered worst of all. Those deemed weak, troublesome, or inconvenient were thrown below. They became warnings whispered to children at night. Be quiet, or you'll end up beneath the throne. Be obedient, or the Alpha King will hear your name. The air down there was thick with despair. The walls remembered every plea, every sob, every prayer murmured in the dark. And prayers there were countless, desperate prayers. Not to Gomez. Never to him. To the moon goddess. Mothers prayed for sons taken after war. Mates prayed for partners dragged away in chains. Omegas prayed simply to survive another night. Their voices never reached the palace above. Music and laughter often echoed from the halls while suffering pulsed beneath the stone. Gomez told himself he was protecting his people. That strength demanded sacrifice. That order required pain. Yet even those loyal to him were not safe. A warrior who returned from battle questioning the slaughter was punished for weakness. A healer who lingered too long with a dying captive was accused of treachery. An elder who spoke of old laws was silenced. Dissent, under Gomez's rule, was a disease. And he cured it with pain. Fear seeped into daily life. Wolves spoke in whispers inside their own homes. Children learned early which questions not to ask. Mates learned to grieve quietly. Above it all, Gomez sat on his throne, convinced that silence meant peace. He never noticed how the moon lingered longer in the sky, how its light seemed to press against palace windows, pale and watchful. He never heard the prayers rising like smoke from beneath his feet. But she did. The moon goddess heard every broken plea. She heard the cries that ended abruptly, the names spoken with trembling hope, the whispered apologies of parents who could not save their children. Each prayer wrapped itself around her light, heavy and insistent. And she remembered. Power without compassion always believes itself eternal. Gomez believed his throne was carved from victory. He believed the gods had turned their faces away, leaving the world to those strong enough to take it. He was wrong. For every scream beneath the throne was a mark against him. Every cage was a testament. Every prayer was a promise waiting to be answered. And the moon goddess was listening. Captives of the Alpha King. The chains beneath the palace did not rest. They rattled with every shift of weight, every shallow breath, every hopeless attempt to remember a life before darkness. Time moved differently in the depths below Alpha King Gomez's throne. Days bled into nights without distinction, measured only by the passing of guards and the ache in tired bones. These were not criminals. They were former warriors, alphas and betas, who had once led their own packs with pride. Their shoulders still carried the memory of command, though iron had bent their backs. Some had fought Gomez openly. Others had surrendered to save their people. All had believed mercy might follow defeat. Instead, they were chained. Their wounds had been allowed to heal just enough to keep them alive. Strength was preserved, not for freedom, but for display. On days of celebration, Gomez ordered them dragged into the light, their shackles polished, their faces unhidden. He wanted the city to see what happened to those who challenged him. This, he said, was order. But the cages held more than warriors. After every war, the soldiers came back with more than trophies. They brought innocence. Scribes, healers, cooks, elders who could barely stand. Some had never held a weapon in their lives. Their crime was belonging to the wrong pack. They were taken quietly at night while fires still smoldered in ruined villages. Families were separated with practiced efficiency. Those who screamed were struck. Those who begged were ignored. Gomez did not need their labor. He needed their fear. The presence of captives kept conquered packs obedient. Hope died quickly when people knew their loved ones lived or suffered beneath the Alpha King's feet. Survival became submission. And then there were the children. The youngest captives did not remember the wars clearly. Their memories were fragments, flames reflected in frightened eyes, hands torn from theirs, the sound of howling grief fading into stone corridors. They grew up in shadows, learning silence before speech, obedience before trust. They were raised to fear the Alpha King's name. Some were trained as servants. Others were simply kept alive, proof that entire bloodlines could be erased slowly. Their eyes watched everything. Their hearts learned to beat quietly. Gomez told himself this, too, was necessary. He spoke of unity, of stability, of a kingdom too large for softness. In his court, he spoke of peace, even as the cries below never fully ceased. He believed fear created order, and order created greatness. The moon goddess called it something else. She watched from above as the moonlight spilled through cracks in the stone, brushing pale fingers across rusted bars and hollow faces. She saw warriors who still dreamed of battle they would never fight again. She saw innocents clutching memories like lifelines. She saw children whose eyes reflected nothing but caution. Each night, her light lingered longer. The moon grew brighter, fuller, its glow cutting deeper into the world. Wolves felt it in their bones. A strange pressure beneath their skin, a pull they could not name. Shifts became restless. Dreams turned heavy and vivid. The sky no longer felt distant. Some guards swore the moon followed them as they patrolled the walls. Gomez noticed the change, but dismissed it. The moon had always belonged to the wolves. It always would. He had survived every omen, every prophecy whispered by frightened elders. He believed himself beyond judgment. Yet the moon goddess was patient only for so long. Above the palace, clouds began to thin unnaturally, as if pushed aside by unseen hands. Moonlight washed the stone in silver, exposing cracks and stains long ignored. Beneath the throne, captives felt warmth for the first time in years. A fragile hope stirred, dangerous, trembling, alive. Prayers grew louder. They were no longer whispered only in desperation. They carried questions now. How much longer? How much more? Do you see us? The moon goddess heard them all. Divine patience is not endless. It stretches, it tests, but it does not forget. Each chained wrist, each stolen childhood, each life reduced to a warning weighed against Gomez's victories. The balance was tipping. And as the moon drew closer, brighter and unblinking, even the Alpha King's throne began to feel smaller, cast in a light that did not forgive, did not look away, and would soon demand an answer. The night the moon stood still. The night came without warning. No storm announced it. No omen screamed its arrival. The sky simply changed. As darkness settled over the kingdom, the moon rose slower than it ever had before, large, heavy, and wrong. Its light was not the gentle silver the wolves had known all their lives. It shimmered with a faint red beneath the glow, as if blood moved just under the surface. Wolves across the city felt it at once. The pull that guided every shift, every transformation tied to moonlight, twisted into something unfamiliar. Warriors gathered in courtyards, teeth clenched, muscles tightening as they reached for their wolves. Nothing answered. Shifts stalled halfway. Bones refused to break. For never came. Panic rippled through the packs as one by one, they failed. The moon hung above them, watching, unmoving. Never in living memory had the wolves been denied their birthright. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some fell to their knees. Others looked to the sky in disbelief, fear sharpening their voices. High above them, the palace windows reflected the moon's strange light, bathing the black stone in silver-red fire. Alpha King Gomez felt it then. Not fear, he would never have named it that, but a tightening in his chest, a pressure where certainty once lived. His wolf stirred restlessly inside him, unsettled, pacing against invisible walls. Gomez rose from his throne and stepped onto the balcony. The moon dominated the sky, closer than it should have been, its glow cutting through him with an intensity that made his vision blur for a heartbeat. His power, once steady and overwhelming, wavered like a flame starved of air. He clenched his fists. The connection he commanded, the invisible thread that bent others to his will, flickered. Guards below shifted uneasily, some glancing up at him, searching for reassurance he did not yet know how to give. For the first time since his rise, Gomez felt watched. The feeling crawled beneath his skin, ancient and undeniable. It pressed against memories he had buried, old stories elders once told of gods who tested kings, of moons that judged as much as they blessed. He pushed the thought away. "This is nothing," he said aloud, his voice sharp in the stillness. "A trick of the sky." He laughed, loud and deliberate, letting the sound carry across the balcony. The guard straightened. Some of the tension eased. If the Alpha King was unafraid, then all was well. Arrogance wrapped itself around him like armor. Below, the city remained restless. Wolves stared at their hands, their bodies, trying again and again to shift. Each failure deepened the unease. The moon did not move. It did not blink. It simply glowed, patient and unyielding. Beneath the palace, captives felt it too. The chains grew warm. The darkness thinned. Moonlight seeped into places it had never reached, touching scarred skin and hollow eyes. Some wept without understanding why. Others whispered prayers that no longer sounded desperate, but certain. Something was coming. Gomez returned to his throne, forcing calm into his posture. He told himself this night would pass like all the others. That power earned through conquest could not be undone by superstition. Yet his wolf refused to settle. The bond that tied him to his dominance trembled, frayed at the edges. It was not gone, but it was no longer absolute. And in that fragile space, doubt slipped in. Outside, the moon held its place, silver-red and unmoving, as if time itself had paused to watch. This was not punishment. Not yet. It was a warning. The moon goddess had awakened, and she had chosen the night the Alpha King believed himself untouchable to remind the world that even kings stood beneath her light. And divine warnings, once given, were never repeated. The moon goddess confronts the king. The moon did not set. As dawn should have broken, the silver-red glow remained fixed in the sky, heavy and absolute. Time itself seemed unwilling to move without permission. The city stood frozen beneath the unnatural light, breaths shallow, hearts pounding with a fear no one dared to name. Then the air changed. It thickened, shimmering as though reality had grown thin. The moon's surface rippled, and from its heart, a figure began to descend slowly, deliberately wrapped in light that bent the night around her. She touched the ground in the palace courtyard without a sound. She was neither towering nor fragile, neither young nor old. Her presence alone reshaped the world. Silver-white hair flowed down her back like liquid moonlight. Her eyes held centuries, reflecting battles long forgotten and prayers never answered until now. Guards dropped to their knees without command. Inside the palace, Alpha King Gomez rose from his throne, every instinct screaming at him to run, to fight, to deny. His wolf pressed hard against his chest, no longer a source of power but of terror. The doors opened on their own. She walked in. Each step echoed like a verdict. Stone cracked beneath her feet, not from force, but from truth pressing down on lies too long upheld. The hall grew silent, no breath, no whisper, no courage left to speak. She stopped before the throne. And she spoke his name. Gomez. The sound carried through the palace, through the city, through the cages beneath the stone. Chains stilled. Hearts froze. The world listened. The Alpha King opened his mouth, but no words came. Her gaze did not burn. It did not rage. It simply saw. "I have watched," she said, her voice calm and endless. "From the first war you waged in my light to the last scream you ignored beneath your throne." Images flooded the hall. Battlefields soaked in blood. Packs falling beneath his banners. Warriors begging for mercy. Mothers crying out as children were dragged away. Cages filling. Iron closing around wrists that once held hope. Every war, she continued, and the scenes shifted. Every scream. The sound echoed, cries layered upon cries, voices he had trained himself not to hear. Every unjust punishment, she finished softly. Gomez staggered back, gripping the arm of his throne as the weight of it all crashed down on him. His victories paraded before him, not as triumphs, but as allowances. Doors opened when they should have closed. Battles won when fate could have turned. He understood then. The moon goddess had never been absent. She had been waiting. "You believed your strength made you untouchable," she said. "You believed my silence was surrender." Her eyes met his, and in them he saw the truth laid bare. "You mistook silence for approval." The words struck harder than any blade. Gomez fell to one knee, the throne towering uselessly behind him. His power, once absolute, bled away like smoke in the wind. The bond that bent others to his will shattered, leaving only the man beneath the crown. This was not judgment delayed out of mercy, the moon goddess said. It was patience measured against your choices. She raised her hand, and the moonlight surged, flooding the palace, the city, the cages below. Chains rattled. Locks weakened. Hope flared like a spark touching dry kindling. "Your trial has arrived." The Alpha King lifted his head, too late to beg, too late to deny. Above him, the moon burned bright and unyielding. And for the first time in his reign, Gomez understood what it meant to stand powerless beneath the gaze of a god. Judgment beneath the silver light. The silence that followed her words was heavier than any roar of battle. Gomez knelt beneath the silver-red glow, the throne behind him no longer a symbol of power, but of everything he was about to lose. The moon goddess raised her hand, and the light shifted, no longer watching, no longer warning. It judged. The bond that had made Gomez Alpha King tore away from him in a single, merciless instant. His wolf howled inside his chest, not in rage, but in grief as the connection shattered. The strength that once bent others to his will drained from his veins, leaving his body trembling, unbearably human. "You ruled through fear," the moon goddess said. "So you will live without command." The air rippled. The long years that should have stretched endlessly before him collapsed into mortality. Immortality, earned through lineage and reinforced by conquest, was stripped away. Time reclaimed him in a rush. His breath came harder. His heart beat louder. He would age. He would weaken. He would die. Then the throne began to crumble. Stone cracked, spider-webbing outward as moonlight burned through it. The seat of power that had loomed over the kingdom for decades collapsed into dust, scattering across the palace floor. The crown slipped from Gomez's grasp and shattered where it fell. There would be no throne to return to. Beneath the palace, locks burst open. Chains fell away as if they had never existed. Warriors stood unsteadily, disbelief giving way to tears. Innocents clutched one another, afraid to hope until the light warmed their skin. Children blinked up at the open corridors, seeing the sky for the first time without iron between them. Across the land, the weight that had pressed down on Pax lifted. Old bonds reawakened. Alphas felt their strength return, not as domination, but as balance. The moon goddess's light traveled far, stitching what had been torn apart. Gomez remained where he was. Alive. He did not beg. He could not. Memory crashed over him in relentless waves, every scream he had ignored, every life he had reduced to a lesson. Without power to shield him, the truth cut deeper than punishment ever could. "This is mercy," the moon goddess said, her voice neither cruel nor kind. "You will remember." She turned away as the moon began to rise back to its rightful distance, the red fading to pure silver. Dawn finally stirred at the horizon, timid but real. The world breathed again. The kingdom would rebuild. Pax would heal. Stories would be told of a night when a god walked among wolves and reminded them of an ancient truth. No alpha reigns above the moon. And as the light softened and the moon goddess vanished from sight, one truth lingered, heavy and unresolved. But the moon goddess wasn't done, because power always leaves scars behind.